So three-man band here on today's episode of WRAL Triangle and 2. Jaylin Jones is to my right. Pat Welter is across the table. I'm the one and only Mark Bergin. This is WRAL Triangle and 2. And fellas, we get to talk transfer portal today. I'm pretty fired up.
Big portal guy here.
I mean, it's like a national holiday. The portal closes January 16th. This is transfer portal closing eve. I mean, let's celebrate.
Pat, I can't even imagine what all this has been like for you with this football season. And it's like, with the portal finally closing and we're still figuring out where players are going, we can finally breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief. I know basketball season is here too, but...
Well, we certainly didn't get Coach Ageddon like we thought we were going to get. You know, Manny Diaz, who we thought might leave for a better job. Yeah. Bill Belichick, who we thought might go to the NFL or just straight up get fired at the worst.
Suppose he still could. But.
Either, I guess anything's on the table. And, of course, Dave Doran, who's, running his Dave Doran show for the last, decade. We thought maybe the time has run its course, but they finished strong, and he's back as well. And I guess maybe we start with who's coming back, which are two of the three quarterbacks in Darian Mensah and CJ Bailey, and one notable one from UNC leaving, Gio Lopez, to Wake Forest.
All right, I got to be just honest with both of you here. Yeah. When I saw Gio Lopez going to Wake Forest, I was like, oh, great, we're going to get a rematch. Not so fast. Wake Forest and UNC don't play each other in the regular season. So the only way these two teams play were it is if they were to make a conference championship. I'm bummed about that.
Right. We got the same problems in college basketball, too, where we're not getting all the rivalries we want in that, and we're not going to get one here. Yeah, it's a bummer.
Yeah, that doesn't happen in the SEC. What is Ole Miss and LSU, they're playing their first SEC game together on the road. In the SEC, that's just not going to happen. You got to get that Wake Forest-UNC matchup. So
when I saw Lopez going there, curious to see if he fares any better than he did this past season at UNC. UNC bringing new offensive coordinator and Bobby Petrino. Freddie Kitchens is gone, so there's a lot. But, Pat, I think you hit the nail on the head with the quarterbacks because Darian Mensah, a player with an NFL future, and you can say the same about CJ Bailey. I thought Mensah could potentially get poached, and the same with Bailey. Like, Pat, when you and I were recording in advance of the NC State-Miami game earlier this season, just a few months ago, it was like, is this going to be a tryout for Bailey considering his ties to the Miami area? And I think it's huge that NC State retains him, and you have a quarterback now where this will be his third consecutive year as the Wolfpack starter.
Yeah, it's huge. And I remember just asking him straight up at one of the media avails before the bowl game, do you plan to come back? And it was very faint. It was hardly a ringing endorsement that he was going to come back. Now, maybe that's just a guy that's uncomfortable with that question and wasn't actually entirely sure, because a lot of it is parents, agents, not even knowing at that point what the market was going to be. So I think the way that Mensah and Bailey come back is you look at it, it's like, well, I've succeeded here. My offensive coordinators are back, for both Duke and NC State. And is the grass necessarily greener? Like they could, both of those guys, I think, are getting drafted if they come out right now, regardless of eligibility, like their actual status. So you go back to the same school. But then the other thing crosses my mind is the Drake May effect, where Drake May was loyal, comes back to UNC, has all this history with the school and the program, all these reasons to come back. But if he had gone to, say, Alabama, I think you could argue he could have, A, maybe won the Heisman Trophy, and B, won a national title. And those are two things that probably isn't going to happen for Bailey or Mensah staying here in the Triangle next season.
Yeah, I really like CJ Bailey needs a lot of credit for not transferring. It's just very rare that you have a player that values continuity. So I'm going to give him a lot of points for that. But in terms of NC State as a whole, I think NC State, they just have room to keep one guy. And they chose the right guy to keep in CJ Bailey, and they lost a lot of other guys to the transfer portal.
We're going to get into that, and I want to keep it on Bailey, though, for just a second, too. I'm with you, because it's like, with all of the money that is available for these players, and specifically with the quarterback position, I mean, we don't know with all of these deals, but it's like, how do you allocate your funds? Being able to keep your quarterback, and again, someone who has an NFL future. I also think about this from the standpoint of if Dave Doran's future is for the longer haul at NC State, to point to, well, hey, that's my NFL quarterback. Come play for me here in Raleigh because I have a demonstrated track record of doing that. So it's like I think about it from the recruiting standpoint as well versus if he were to go to another school. And we talk about how many other players are out in the portal and how many other talented quarterbacks that there are too. So to the point of the grass not always being greener, I think that really rings true where it's like, well, certainly if CJ Bailey or Darian Mensah had been on an open market, some school would have picked one of those players up, but there aren't as many of those spots available as you might think that there are, just considering how many players are in the transfer portal.
I think the biggest challenge right now with the transfer portal, and I think this is kind of the CJ Bailey conundrum, if I'm a college football GM, value, right? Are you getting the right amount of value of what you're paying, and are you receiving that same amount of value? I feel like right now the transfer portal is a little bit flipped. Like you can just be an average player, but he's in the portal, we're going to overpay. I think NC State was like, hey, let's keep our guy. Let's keep him out of the portal so we're not in a bidding war that you're getting into. And I think they made the right decision. But I think this is more of an NC State thing rather than a CJ Bailey thing.
So, Jaylin, we talked some before the pod, and I want you to stay on this point too because NC State loses Hollywood Smothers. Initially, he commits to Alabama, is now flipped to Texas. We were talking some before the pod about how NC State the last few years has almost been like a feeder school to other universities where you play really well for a season or two at NC State, and then a lot of players who have had a lot of success with other programs.
Absolutely. So I think Alabama was in a running for 3 of NC State's top players. Now, was there tampering? I don't know. But if you know anything,
that word doesn't even matter, right?
It doesn't matter. So I wrote this down. Hollywood Smothers had a situationship with Alabama. He was committed there, was enrolled in classes, ended up taking a visit to Texas, flipped to Texas last minute. You got Jacarius Peak. He was pursued by Bama, never made his visit because he got stopped in South Carolina. South Carolina, if you guys don't know, kept Lenore Sellers. To keep him, you got to make some promises. Their O-line was bad. So they went all in. We got to get Jacarius Peak. Also, side note, I think South Carolina's taking the Texas Tech approach. Get some stars and then fill in the rest with just role players. That's the take I have there. But Bama did end up with Noah Rogers. Noah Rogers, former 5-star, signed with Ohio State. 3rd, 4th best wide receiver at NC State, was kind of productive. But how is NC State replacing that talent? That's kind of what I want to focus on. So I think NC State's becoming more of a feeder because you're replacing Hollywood Smothers with Davion Goss. I think that's how you say his name from UNC, the running back. You replace Terrell Anderson and Noah Rogers with Victor Snow from Buffalo, a productive 5'8" player in the MAC, and then you have Chance Robinson, a sophomore. He played 4 games for Miami, right? But those 4 games, Florida A&M, Ball State, and Cal. So you're getting some guys from Georgia, Texas, Miami, but you're getting those guys that haven't seen the field and they're not proven. You get what I'm saying? Right. So, and then you're going to the lower level and trying to get those productive guys, hoping that skill set scales up. This is kind of Dave Doering's wheelhouse as a guy that is known for being a talent developer, but instead of developing talent for NC State, he's developing talent for the Power 2.
Well, Pat, we saw this just a year ago. Casey's Concepcion was an All-American return man for Texas A&M, and then Brandon Cisse as well, South Carolina DB. And you might, if you just look at the stats, okay, they're not throwing his way. He's going to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing here is the haves and the have-nots, the market's separating. Like, how many years now are we in on the transfer portal? And things are the market is settling. And what we're learning is that UNC, NC State, and Duke are not playing in the same class with the big boys. They just aren't. And it's like you go through the top transfer portal class rankings, LSU, Ole Miss, Texas, Penn State, Oklahoma State, who's investing in a new coach, Indiana, who's playing in the national title, Kentucky, who's got a new coach, Notre Dame, Texas A&M, Ohio State, and there's Texas Tech at 11.
Hang on, Jaylin, did he even name a single ACC school in there? In all seriousness, was there a single ACC school?
There wasn't. Now, Miami's playing in the national title, so they deal with kind of going in late on the transfer portal. There's some exceptions made there. And notably, the number 12 ranked school, Virginia Tech,
We got to get to 12 before we get to an ACC school, Pat.
And they're only up there because they're bringing in a new coach in James Franklin. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the rankings of UNC, who's 43rd, Duke, who's 60th, and NC State was right in between there at 54. Now, these are the 24/7 Sports rankings. It lets you know what you're actually competing for. And I think you nailed it on the head that when you go through really all of the transfer classes for Duke, NC State, and UNC, they're similar in the regards that they are either small school guys that played or big school guys that didn't. And I was talking to somebody on UNC staff about what last year's class was for them, and it was that. And it really comes down to evaluation. Mm-hmm. And for Michael Lombardi and UNC, so much of what they brought in was a miss. Most notably, the quarterback position in Gio Lopez, at least with the fit with that staff. So I think this comes down to, if you're going to evaluate these guys when it comes to like the quarterback, the high dollar players, you cannot afford to miss or your whole season tanks. And then these guys from other schools, you're gambling, but I guess it's less of a gamble than a high school player, right? Because you at least have seen them in a college system somewhat.
All right, so let's stay on UNC for just a second there, Pat. The question I'd have is, how much does this fall on Billy Edwards Jr.'s shoulders, considering he's one of the heralded transfers for the Tar Heels coming over from Wisconsin?
It's a lot, and I think the word I would say for UNC's class overall, and Billy Edwards as the kind of focal point of it, is underwhelming, right? Like, I don't know. Billy Edwards Jr. might be great, right? Like, but we don't know that. He's basically had one real season as a starter at Maryland, where he was second in the Big Ten in yards, but just 15 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, hardly like really moving the needle. Goes to Wisconsin, and I guess it's encouraging to me that somebody like Luke Fickell, who has a real good track record with offense, saw something there to bring him in. He gets hurt. It doesn't work out. Now he's coming to UNC. So I just think that UNC... Yeah, they made a big investment in football in regards to the football coach.
Yeah.
But as far as the actual roster, the money just really hasn't been there, and it's left Michael Lombardi to nail his evaluations, and so far he has not done that, and we're going to see how he does it in year 2.
Evaluations have just become so much more important over the past couple of years, and you can't just pull the Nick Saban approach. Oh, I'm just going to get the best players, and I'm going to stack those down to my 2s and to my 3s. It's really about evaluations and seeing what's the best value I can get out of this. So if you're in the grocery store and you're trying to get some ground beef, you're not going to go to Wegmans because guess what? I got to make this $20 stretch in terms of your cap. You're trying to go see what can I get the best value so I can get other things to cook with this ground beef. Mm-hmm. You just don't want to get the ground beef. If you're making tacos, you got to have enough money for the shells, the lettuce, the tomato, so you can have a full meal. So I can imagine that's the same conversation they're having at the UNC gym room.
Forget the tacos. I want fajitas. That's what I want. Yeah.
So then there you go. As your approach is like, okay, we got enough money for this flank steak, but do we have enough money for the peppers and the onions that make a fajita a fajita?
I mean, A, I'm hungry, and B, this is where I think this is some of the UNC Michael Lombardi 33rd NFL team stuff does apply, right? Because you have to allot a certain amount of budget to the cornerstone positions, which are quarterback,
O-line,
pass rusher, left tackle. And I guess in UNC's regard, like who are they bringing back? Well, they're bringing back Melkart Abujade, so that's their cornerstone at pass rusher, but they're not able to retain Tyler Thompson, who was their other breakout, the pass rusher, and he's leaving to Louisville. Other than that, who are they bringing back? Like, it's a little bit sparse, right? Like, they're losing basically their entire offensive line. They're bringing back Damon June at running back and Jordan Shipp at the skill players. So that's something.
But, okay, the flip side of that. Do you want a lot of them back? Because, Pat, we were just talking about this several weeks back where it's like, if Belichick and company bring back Freddie Kitchens and bring back Gio Lopez, how is that supposed to muster enthusiasm about the 2026 season? So that's where I think bringing in Bobby Petrino, it's not just the 4-8 record from a year ago that UNC had. 19 points per game, which is 118th among 134 FBS teams. And then they were one of the worst offenses, 288 yards per game. That's 129th out of 134 teams in all of college football.
I think fans have to realize that. Fans love to freak out with the headlines. Yes, there's a lot of players getting in the portal, but do you want those guys back? I'm a big believer fans should be friends with other fans. UNC fans need to become fans with Tennessee and Auburn fans, right? And why I'm saying that, Tennessee fans are freaking out, oh, we have to import a whole new defense. Well, the defense last year sucked. Do you really want those guys back? Same thing with Auburn shedding tears over Deuce Knight and Cam Coleman. Look at the production numbers. Those guys did not produce. So if you can't produce and you're trying to get a certain amount of value because you're spending that much amount of money, you need to really get the guys that can produce and match the same amount of money that you're putting in.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Bobby, you talk about the encouragement and excitement, Mark. Bobby Petrino is probably the single most exciting thing we have to talk about when it comes to UNC. And he's not necessarily the single most exciting guy, other than just a really winding, long, interesting resume of both positive production on the field and questionable decisions off of it. Yeah. But he does have a great track record of offense.
He
Basically,
does.
Every single place he's ever gone, either as a coordinator or as a head coach. And he's coached some pretty exciting quarterbacks, namely Lamar Jackson, one of them at Louisville. And I think it's interesting when you look at this quarterback battle, like Billy Edwards Jr. is going to be the favorite. But until we see these guys on the field in spring, and even knowing UNC, that's going to be about 10 minutes of stretching and warm-up. So we're still probably not going to know until they go to Ireland. But Miles O'Neill is the quarterback from Texas A&M who redshirted last season, comes in. He's going to be a redshirt sophomore. He was recruited by Petrino to Texas A&M in the one season he was an offensive coordinator there. So that is interesting to me. And so there's a couple mixed signals there where we've got the experienced quarterback coming in Edwards. We have a quarterback that the offensive coordinator personally recruited in O'Neill. And then we have Travis Burgess, who was the big-time recruit out of Georgia, who was hurt last season and is probably most likely not going to be in the mix next season as he kind of learns the college game.
Yeah. So we're already talking about QB battle, and when it comes to Chapel Hill.
Just go. Here we go.
Yeah, bring on the spring practice. Few other directions I could go here. We mentioned Hollywood Smothers. As far as I know, Jaden Duke Scott will be back for the Wolfpack 2 in the backfield. And Pat, he was the player who, when you talk about how did NC State upset an undefeated Georgia Tech team this past season, it was Scott who had a breakout game, who was filling in for an injured Hollywood Smothers.
Yeah, and then you bring in Davion Goss, who's a similar back, actually, kind of like, your lower center of gravity kind of back that can kind of be powerful. And Davion Goss was great in the passing game. And we have to have a little intra-triangle transfer, right? To stir things up.
I'm so glad we're at this point of the pod because this was in my notes. The players who go what I call full Benedict Arnold. So you go from one triangle institution to another. And we've seen this down through the years, not just in football, but in hoops as well. Ty White as well, going from UNC to NC State as well. So another player who's going from North Carolina to NC State. And so at least we'll get to see them go head to head. And then it's just like, oh, man, I mean, that storyline writes itself, Pat.
It does. And I think just some other notes I had just about the transfer process. One thing I've learned is there's been some, I think we're seeing this happen in real time. Like there's the Washington quarterback that tried to get out, then couldn't get out, and is now coming back.
You signed a deal, man. You signed a deal.
And that's the thing we're learning is that actually there are contracts. And I've heard this firsthand from some people at UNC that there were guys that were trying to transfer who either agreed to a clause or their agent wasn't able to get them out of a clause that basically was a prohibitive buyout, where they were looking at a buyout as big as basically their previous year's salary to leave. So I think when you're in that situation, you either have to be good enough that your next school is willing to pay your own buyout to get you, or you just come back. So it's kind of interesting to see that. And then you look at guys like Darian Mensah. Well, he was reportedly signed a 2-year contract, correct? Mm-hmm. I don't think we ever heard the details of CJ Bailey's contract. Gio Lopez was on a 2-year contract. I don't know the terms in which he left UNC under. Maybe it was just a see you later.
I think we're good.
Let's hand your problem off to somebody else, because that was kind of prohibitive, right? Where like all last season they were playing him because they were paying him, And it was almost like they were going to do it again this year.
To me, just from what I saw on field with my own two eyes, that had to have been the case. To me, there was no other explanation, but that is just what I am watching. That comes from no like firsthand knowledge or actually talking with someone who would be in the know about that. But like, I don't see any other explanation. I mean, Pat, you and I were literally joking about this, where it's like the other quarterbacks on the roster, like Bryce Baker and then Torrey Newkirk,
Right.
they still could retain their eligibility at the end of the year for playing 4 games or less, and UNC didn't even try. And what I mean by that, too, is like once the Tar Heels were eliminated from bowl eligibility, why not see what the other players on your roster could do? That never made sense to me.
And it is my understanding that the way it works at UNC is that Lombardi, like Belichick coaches the football, but Lombardi is actually dictating in certain terms who plays and how. Like Belichick has maybe changed his MO from how we ran things at the Patriots, where he was both, to now where he has actually kind of separated church and state. And I think there's positives to that kind of workflow, and there are negatives. And I think one of them was the Gio Lopez experiment this season.
The only thing that I could even understand with it, Pat, would be to say if you don't want to get one of those players injured, but those players aren't even on the roster at this point.
Yeah.
So it just, anyways, Jaylin, dude, hop in.
I really think that this is the learning curve that some people raise the red flag about, this Bill Belichick era that they just have to get used to. Like, the game is different in college, and the game is different from college to NFL. Also talking about a lot more bodies that you have to manage. Roster is going up to 105, am I correct?
Yes,
And
yes.
So, again, it's like it's about evaluation and knowing who you have on your roster. I'm a big believer the player is who he is. I don't really see too much development. That's why Indiana's gone so much gold getting those older guys, because they know who they have, and that player is already developed into who they're going to be. So play the players, man. You got to know who's on your roster. Also, you never know which young guys are going to surprise you.
Well, Jaylin, to that point too, and we've talked about this a lot on WRAL Triangle too, and that's a huge difference to go get a player in the portal who has several years in a strength and conditioning program and knows the rigors of college football versus an incoming freshman coming from the high school level. I don't care how advanced the high school level was. It's not the same as Power 4 college football.
18-year-old versus a 23-year-old player, 24-year-old player. I'm sorry, give me the 23, 24-year-old player, especially when the stakes are so much higher. Indiana is in a national championship in 2 years. You're talking about being able to flip an entire season. You don't want to go to Florida State route, but you want to get good evaluations on the guys that are in the portal, especially those lower-level guys that end up kicking butt at the combine. You want to get those guys ahead of time instead of discovering them in the combine like, oh, this guy at South Dakota State really could have helped my football team.
Yeah, I think just looking at who you bring in tells the story. And like we've kind of established, the type of guys Duke, UNC, and NC State are bringing in are in similar ballparks. When you look at some of the Duke guys, you'll see some of the academic schools like Princeton and Dartmouth. That's not by accident. That's because of the academic standards they have there.
Shout out to Vandy.
But as Vandy as well. And as we've established, like, some of these guys are either from small school guys that played or they're from big school guys that didn't play, and it comes down to evaluation. Well, Duke and NC State now have given us reasons to trust their evaluation and their development. Like Dave Doran, his whole thing is built on 3-star guys. Like, what was that quote? Their signing day, he was asked about his signing class relative to UNC. He's like, well, I think every year UNC's had a better signing class, and we just kicked those guys' butt.
He might have brought that up on his own accord.
Just on his own?
Yeah.
That's very Dave Doran of him.
Dave knows who he is, and I always give him the most credit for that. And, he's really finding his own lane of development, but now developing for other people, that sucks. Again, back to the Noah Rogers thing. You're talking about getting a guy that couldn't cut it at the P2 level. You develop him, you kind of give him a platform, and then guess what? He's gone to Alabama now.
But that goes back into the money that they have in the collective too, of just like the resources you have as a university relative to that of competing against the other big time elite level schools all across the country. I mean, it's one thing for the ACC, but I go back to Pat's list of the transfer portal. We have to get to number 12 to get to our very first ACC school. We talk about the schools that are top in the rankings when it comes to having the best transfer portal class. Pat, I know you've brought this up too, and you even asked Manny Diaz this question about the interest that he had, or maybe the lack thereof. If he has another 9-win season, I'd be shocked if he stays in Durham. I mean,
right, because again, like as good as he's done at Duke, like their class is 60th. I mean, how realistic is it that you're going to really be able to compete? And you're going through the schools that are in the top of the rankings in the ACC. Well, it's Louisville, it's Cal, who has a new coach. And some of these, the new coach bump isn't necessarily sustainable. But I just don't know. It's Georgia Tech. Like, our schools aren't in the mix. They're not in the mix. Like, I don't know how you expect to be Indiana or be somebody that breaks through, like, if you're not going to play the game. And I think UNC, like I said, they made a big investment in the football coach. They aren't making a big investment in football. And the challenge here is, like, the whole system is under threat, right? Because we're all going through this. All these schools that we mentioned that have a new coach and the bump that comes with that. Well, then it's like getting the investors, the alumni, the collective, everything involved that goes into this to re-up year after year in these rosters. Like, it seems unsustainable. But maybe just the pride and the passion that is college football allows this to continue. But it seems like, I mean, the markets keep going higher. Like, Ohio State won the national championship with a $25 million roster. Well, now, a year later, that's like the baseline to compete is $25 million. When you're talking about the revenue share, you could probably put about 13.5, like, legally into your roster just from rev share. So then you're looking at like another 10, like, just to compete. So, that's where we're at in like 2 years.
What else are we missing in this conversation? Because it's, I'll be honest with you, full disclosure to listeners and viewers, it's sometimes challenging to talk about all this with players where we have limited information on. But what are we missing here before we wrap here?
I mean, I think some interesting notes. Now, The Athletic did this research. I probably should have done the phone calls myself, but there's only so much time in the day.
Clone Pat Welter.
So I'll give Sam Kahn the credit for this. It's just interesting. Like, what's the market for players? And I think this is notable where he says the Power 4 QB is at least $1 million, which is up from $75K last year and upwards of $4 million and even higher a season. An example there, Brendan Sorsby from Cincinnati, one of the top-ranked transfer quarterbacks. He goes to Texas Tech, $5 million. Offensive tackles range about $600K to $1.3 million. Edge rushers, $500K to $2 million. Running backs in the $400 to $900K range. Receivers about the same, $500 to $1 million. So that just gives you an idea.
It's a lot of tacos and a lot of fajitas, Jaylin.
Listen, when you think about it, remember, it's still that $20 million kind of $15 to $20 million cap that teams are working with. How are you going to divvy that up and formulate a 105-man roster? Fans, you got to manage your expectations. I think I have one last hot take. I think Diaz is going to be. I think he's going to be the last coach standing in the triangle.
Whoa. Okay.
That's not forced out,
no,
right? Like,
no.
I think scandal, everything, because I look at next year's job openings. FSU might open. Baylor might open. If Clemson makes a move, sure.
USC potentially.
USC potentially. I don't see the big job opening that catches his eye. Like, this cycle had tons of job movement. So I think Diaz will be the longest tenured head coach in the triangle.
Yeah, we'll see as we get closer to the end of Dave Dorn's contract and then year 2 of Belichick, to where if you don't get substantially better, the Tar Heels from year 1 to year 2, I mean.
And that schedule is kind of soft last year, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, much harder this year. I mean, I was astonished. I think my last point was that I thought this season UNC had to do 2 things to, like, establish some. If they're going to bring back Belichick, they needed to bring in a new offensive coordinator. Now, fairness to Freddie Kitchens, I think he had kind of a raw deal. He was a holder from previous staff, so nothing to say bad about him. I think anybody would have struggled in that situation. But They needed to bring in a new offensive coordinator, needed to bring in a new quarterback. I think they relatively nailed it with the OC in Petrino. But the quarterback surprised me. Like, if you're making this big investment in football, to not be in the mix for any, not even like the second tier, third tier quarterbacks.
DJ Lagway's still out there.
that's a great example because I was going through all the names and I couldn't even get down the list in these recruiting sites to even find Billy Edwards' name on the list.
Name a few of them, Pat.
All right, so these were the top transfer quarterbacks this season, or at least some of them. Brennan Sorsby, Cincinnati to Texas Tech. Drew Mestamaker, North Texas to OK State. Lagway from Florida. Last I saw, he was committed to Baylor, but maybe I have that incorrect. Dylan Raiola, Nebraska to Oregon. Byron Brown, guy with local ties. USF to
Raiola
Auburn.
could still be out there too because remember Moore's coming back to Oregon, so we'll see if he's back out on the market or if he decides to stay in Eugene. But that's another example of a top-tier quarterback. And to our point earlier, this is why C.J. Bailey and Darian Mensah are staying put because of all the talent. But Pat,
the market was a little saturated, right? It's all relative to the free agent class, to use an NFL term. I mean, we could keep going here. Rocco Beck to Iowa State, went to Penn State. Josh Hoover, TCU, guy who beat the Tar Heels handedly. Would have been nice to have come here. He's going to Indiana. So watch out for Kurt Cignetti and them next year.
My red flag is you're not even getting visits with these guys. These guys aren't coming to campus. You're not hearing a recruitment pitch. What are the players hearing and what are the agents hearing about UNC? What on the market? I'm very interested to see that versus the perception that we have.
Yeah, that's something I would love to make some phone calls of. And let's just to kind of fast forward because I only went through about half the list. And like I said, I couldn't even get to Edwards. But guys going to our conference, the ACC, like, all right, let's at least, who are we competing with? Mm-hmm. Well, Virginia was the highest. They landed the highest ranked quarterback, Bo Pribula from Missouri, previously Penn State. Yeah. And then Lincoln Kienholz from Oklahoma State is going to Louisville. So, like I said before, UNC, NC State, and Duke are not competing in these same classes. Now, obviously, Duke and NC State weren't looking for a quarterback, but I think just going through that list, and like you said, UNC isn't even like in the conversation for these guys. Mm-hmm. It surprised me because if you want to win, you got to be willing to play the game.
You got to have the right guys on the bus.
All right. He's the one and only Pat Welter. He is Jaylin Jones. Pat, I know you always have some legendary road stories. We're up against time. Anything before? If not, we don't need to force it. I can wrap us. But
I'll just tell a proud dad story because when you got 3 young kids, it's hard to get them. To be well behaved, if you will. Yeah. And for whatever reason, my kids like to play in the front yard. But we got a Christmas gift, and it was a dud on Christmas Day. But my son opens this up from grandma, and it's a big box, and it's a net that you could throw a ball at, and it'll throw it back to you.
Good gift.
Or a target.
Okay. Good gift.
It could be a target. You do a lot of different sports with it. He opens it, he's like, what is this? But I predicted it would be the favorite gift, ultimately, of the year. I built that thing. A couple swear words not allowed to be said on this podcast in the building process. I have a problem with instructions that aren't clear. I don't want to have to rebuild this thing twice. IKEA, shout out. But I built it, and now it's a big hit. And I got a future D1 quarterback, baby. And I'm back out there throwing, too, for my high school quarterback days. It's been a big hit in the Welter household.
Love it. Love it.
To me, it sounds like you've gotten just as much use out of this toy as your kids have, Pat.
I am working. I go on deep dives on Instagram on, throwing motions. I was always, trying to, because I wasn't a great quarterback. And I was like, if I can just get 10 more yards of arm strength, maybe I can really play. So I was always experimenting back in the day, but this is pre-quarterback coach in social media. So I've learned some stuff myself. So I'm working them out, trying to snap my wrist like Lamar, Josh Allen. So yeah, I'm having a blast. I haven't thrown out my elbow yet.
Well, okay. Wow. I love it. I can't wait to see the videos.
He's Pat Welter. To my right is Jaylin Jones. I'm Mark Bergin. This is another edition of WRAL Triangle and 2. If you haven't already, like and subscribe on our YouTube page. And Apple and Spotify, 5 stars and 5 stars only. We will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Until then, take care and so long, everybody.